Hello, so I'm Erica Donison, one of the team who runs the ASO website. I have the pleasure of speaking with Rajal Cohen of the University of Idaho. I'll ask her to say which department she's in a moment, but this is a follow-on from last month when we posted the three papers that she and her colleagues have been working on and published over, well, yes, past 10 years about, looking at how different ways of asking people to change their posture has an effect on postural stability. So if you didn't read the papers last month, then you still have the chance to go back and do that. But hopefully we're going to unpick some of the principles and the findings in this discussion. So welcome, Rajal.
Thank you.
And perhaps could you just say what department you're in and what you do in those departments?
Yeah. So my primary home is in the Department of Psychology and Communication. That's where we have our graduate program in human factors. But I also have an affiliate appointment in the Department of Biological Sciences because that's where the neuroscience program is housed.
Right.
And my recent PhD student was actually a neuroscience student. I would also like to add that I'm an Alexander teacher. And that actually came first for me. I graduated in 1997 and worked as an Alexander teacher for several years before returning to school. And so it was the Alexander technique that inspired my academic career, really.
Great. That's lovely. That's lovely to know.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we're going to start by looking back in time to the first paper that you did, which was looking at people who live with Parkinson's disease.
My first paper in this series, yes.
Yes, in this series. Yes, I know. Sorry about that. Yes, I know you've written many papers.
Yeah.
Yes. So why did you start with people with Parkinson's?
Yeah. And that actually goes partly to why I even took that postdoctoral position. So that paper was carried out while I was a postdoc. And it's because Parkinson's disease is sort of the opposite of the Alexander technique. People with Parkinson's disease tend to be very rigid. They're not very mobile. They have a lot of muscle co-contraction, and especially like you can often spot them because they're so pulled down in front. And they also have issues with executive function, inhibitory control. So not just inhibiting a response, but also releasing that inhibition. We have a couple papers on that also. So it's like a perfect model to look at the ideas of the Alexander technique, the ideas of how the mind and the body are connected. There's this kind of whole psychomotor process.
Yeah.
So that's why I was there at OHSU, Oregon Health and Science University in Portland, where they have a balance disorders lab and have access to lots of people with Parkinson's disease, and good facilities and set up for recruitment and all that. Yeah.
Right.
A great first population, at least.
Yes. So at that point, you were thinking you were going to take it further and include other groups of people in this.
Absolutely. I was like, here I am in the spot where I have access to Parkinson's disease. I should do this study. Even though like there's some kind of logical sequence in which people might go the other way around, like start with healthy people and then try it with a population with a neurological disorder. But it made sense for me to do it in the other direction, in part because I thought I would see the biggest effects there potentially, and in part because I had access. So a lot of decisions in science are motivated by very practical considerations. And that's, as in life, right?
Yes. Absolutely. Thank you. So going forward then, you then did the other studies looking at, the lighten up, as they're called, instructions for healthy older people and then in young adults. So I just wanted to unpick what came out of all of that. What did you find that was similar, and how did that lead you to think what's going on here?
The biggest consistent difference we saw was that the effortful posture leads to negative effects on balance, and as you would expect, to over contraction, excessive muscular effort, that seems to impair balance. So balance isn't the be all end all of motor control. It's not the be all end all of Alexander technique. But it is something that's easy to measure in the lab and something that's easy to influence quickly. So pain is a reason that a lot of people get into Alexander technique. But the only way of really measuring it is by asking people. So it's a subjective measure, and it tends to be slower changing. And I wanted to look at something that we could change quickly, just have an effect.
Yeah. So I think what I was wondering was, what do you think is actually going on that creates the difference between the responses to the three different, so because all three groups of people of different ages and health basically more or less showed the same responses, didn't they? Despite the fact that you actually use slightly different methods in each one, and we'll discuss why that was in a minute. But so something's going on as the difference between lighten up as a instruction and either relax or stand up straight type things. And we as an Alexander teachers, we might sort of intuitively think we know what that is, but I'm wondering whether there is a way of putting that into words as to what you think is what your supposition is of what's actually going on there.
Yeah, well, as you may remember from our conversation a couple of years ago, Tim Cacciatore and some other colleagues and I have been developing this model of postural tone and body schema as being core to why the Alexander technique helps people. So postural tone is the background muscle activity and how it's distributed through the whole body, not just at the point of the the action, right? So you're going to move your arm. It's not just your arm that's involved.
Yeah.
Right? It's your whole body that is involved to facilitate that. And that is a concept that is well understood in the Alexander technique, but not necessarily everywhere else. But I think it's scientifically valid, justifiable, and investigatable.
Yeah.
So when you use the effortful instructions, you're told to pull your head up and back and pull your shoulders back and your chest up and your stomach in and all those things. There's overcontraction and less fluid distribution of muscle tone as needed. And in the relaxed condition, right, you have let your head sink down and be heavy, and let your arms hang heavy and your shoulders. And in that case, you have lower postural tone, which is also less responsive.
Yeah.
And less connected.
Yeah.
So in the first study, the 2015 paper, we had access to Twister, which is the device that Tim Cacciatore helped Victor Gerfinkel design. And that lets us actually assess postural tone. And that was the one where we could see that the lighten up instructions, which are just let your head balance up at the top of your spine, let the ground send you up, and so on. Those instructions, the Alexander-based instructions, led to the most adaptable postural tone in Twister, which is nice because in other kinds of measures like muscle, like EMG, if you're just recording from the muscles, you might see the Alexander technique as an intermediate condition, right, between the too relaxed and the too tight, right? It's like the Goldilocks in the middle. But in the postural tone, it was actually way over here, and the other two were over here. So it's actually not just in the middle; it's something else that allows for the postural tone to be adaptable, not just in the middle, but adaptable.
Yeah,
which is pretty neat.
It is,
in my opinion.
Yeah, great, thank you. That's really good. And then I wanted to go on to ask you about some of the challenges that you faced in designing the studies, and how you ended up sorting those things out, just to help people have an idea of what goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah. Well, like I said, the first thing you want when you're going to do a study is you want something that's going to work. You want something that's going to show an effect, right? So this is experimental work. If you're doing observational work, it's different, right? If you're just doing interviews or surveys or qualitative work, that's different. But for laboratory experimental work, you want to show this group is different from this group, or this intervention is different from that intervention, or different from that control condition, or this manipulation, has different effects than this other condition of manipulation. So that's what we were looking for, and something that would show effects and that would show them rapidly.
Yeah.
And that would be amenable to the manipulation, which was verbal. And I picked the verbal manipulation because when you do an intervention study with Alexander technique, there's so much going on, right? You say, yes, they got better. They had 24 sessions and they did this and this and this and this. And the teacher responded to them in a sensitive way and interacted with them and had a connection with them and had their hands on and told them these things and observed them. There's so much going on and it's wonderful. I mean, I love it. I love the whole package. But then, like, as you may recall with the big back pain study, the BMJ study, that's an awesome study. It's a great study. But then people were like, yeah, but why does it work? Like, I don't believe you without your mechanism. And some people have that response, right? So my mission is more to try to think, okay, well, there's not just one mechanism, okay? Right? We said there's this change in postural tone, but there are various ways to get to it, right? And then we try to combine lots of different things, right? The Alexander technique, we're not just a like one trick wonder, but to try to get at a particular mechanism, I said, okay, so what if we just talk to people? Then there's no question about, the woo-woo hands-on magic, right? These are just words. Anybody could say these words. So that's why we did the study this way. And unfortunately, some people, when they read the paper, interpret it as thinking that's what Alexander technique is, even though I don't ever say that. I always say, these are instructions that were simplified and designed from Alexander technique, inspired by Alexander technique, and, also have in common with things that you could see in other somatic practices. But yeah, it was meant to be a distillation of just one little element of what the Alexander technique is. And then I wanted to choose 3 sets of instructions that were really different from each other, of course. In the first study, I was the one giving the instructions. And I realized that it was much too tempting for me to start being an Alexander teacher, right? Do you understand? If not, let me try to rephrase it for you, right? I'm even tempted to touch somebody, which is like exactly what I said was not going to do. So in the second and third study, I actually didn't even go in the room when the studies were taking place. I trained my investigators. I gave them a script and I let them do it. Because I wasn't trying to study an Alexander lesson. I was really trying to say, what if you just have these instructions? How does it affect you?
Yeah.
So that's in terms of the manipulation, which is key. And then in terms of the measurements, I did a whole bunch of different measures in the first study. So we did twister to assess postural tone. We did standing on a force platform and just standing quietly to see what postural sway does. And that is a very standard measure. So that's another good thing. If you can use a measure that other people have used, for one thing, it's familiar. So it has what they call face validity, but also you can make comparisons, right? This other study found that this manipulation led to this effect, and we found the same thing, or we found half as much of an effect, right? You can literally make comparisons that way. So that, and also the analysis tools are already developed.
Yeah.
You don't have to start from scratch and figure out how to analyze data, which with movement problems can be a big deal. It can be fun. I mean, I spent a lot of my years in graduate school learning how to analyze data in MATLAB and coming up with cool new algorithms. It's very fun, but it definitely takes a lot of time. And then, like I said, you have to convince people that it's valid.
Yeah.
So standing postural sway is very simple. We looked at the postural alignment, which is, again, a lot of face validity. Just where is the head relative to the body? We probably did a few other things too, but that's what I remember right now. And step initiation. That was a cool one.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because we had the 2 flat force platforms, and we could assess how the center of pressure changes when you step.
So that study was a lot more complex in a way. You had more things for the participants.
I had the best equipment there at my postdoc. Yeah, that's Faye Horak's lab. So I tried to make full use of it. Yes. And then the second study was in my new lab here, was still pretty new here at the University of Idaho. And we did have the camera system, but we didn't have the force plates. But we did have the Opal accelerometer system. So we could assess postural sway. So that's the piece that carries over actually across all three studies, is just the quiet stance. Very, very simple. And then we also assessed, we didn't do step initiation because we didn't have the force platforms to measure the things that they usually measure with step initiation. But we did do a thing where they just picked their foot up and held it for a few seconds, and we could track that easily with the cameras. And then we also measured the muscle activity with EMG. And that was nice because we hadn't done that in the previous study, although Tim Cacciatore did it in some of his previous work. So it kind of builds a bridge there.
Yeah.
And the third study was not actually the third study. It was published third, but it was done second.
Oh, right.
It was done quite a long time ago by an undergraduate student who just needed a little project before she went back to Germany. And she ran the study. And then it was just such a little study. And she was gone and didn't really need the publication, right? So if you do a study that's led by a graduate student, they need the publication to make progress in their career. So that kind of pushes it forward. Also, it was just little, right? All we did was postural sway.
Yeah.
So I was worried that it wouldn't be interesting enough, right? But then after we had published the study with the healthy older adults and seen the same general pattern, it was like, well, this could be a cool little replication. Yeah. We published it as like a short communication. And yeah, it turned out there was at least enough interest to publish it. It's yet to be seen in terms of citations. The Parkinson's one is getting fairly well cited, although, as I said, not everybody interprets it right, but that's always true. Anytime you read a study and they cite another study, fairly good odds the study that they're citing doesn't actually say what they're claiming it says. It goes up or down depending on the journal and how careful the reviewers are and the source.
Yeah. So my next question is, where do you want to go next with this? Because even though those weren't in the sequence that they come out, there's obviously more to do. So what would you like to do next?
There is more to do next.
There's always more to do.
There is always more to do. One of the things is we now have twister working in our lab. So we're doing trying to do some really simple twister studies to begin with, that are not lighten up related. But in terms of lighten up, so we could do something with twister again with young people. So the only ones who have done lighten up and twister are the people with Parkinson's disease. So we could see whether the lighten up has similar effects with people without Parkinson's disease, either young or older people. I told you I started way over on the end of let's just give verbal instructions to try to, eliminate anything that would be hard to explain. And the hardest stuff to explain of all is the hands. But it's also kind of the coolest stuff, right? And so I kind of think, well, how can we get there? So one of my ideas, I don't know when we'll get to this, but I think we will, would be to use the lighten up instructions, but to have two people in the room. So the one person is getting the lighten up instructions, and then they're putting hands on the third person. And it would have to be some, very easy light contact, maybe just a hand on a hand or a hand on a shoulder, some very non-invasive kind of thing. And then we would get subjective impressions from the receiver. They would have to not know what instructions the other person was getting. And we could my thought is maybe the first time we would do it, we would just do it open-ended. And then we would try a version where it's, check this box or rate these factors. Yeah. There's a lot. It's a very new idea. I think really fun to develop, though. Yeah. The touch, like I said, is a lot of the magic, but it has to be not just magic, right? It has to be something.
Yes. It'd be nice to show what the magic is, wouldn't it?
Yeah. And now that we have enough of an explanation, in terms of the postural tone, then the argument could be, the postural tone of a person putting hands on another person is distributed in such a way that their contact gives a different subjective impression. there'd be some work there, but I'm pretty excited about that idea.
Yeah, it sounds like it might take quite a lot to pull together to kind of make it something you can measure and get the right kit in the room.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be hard. I mean, I think we want to ask people is what we want to do. I don't think
right, rather than measure muscular effort or
yeah.
So
this just occurred to me.
this is good.
But also put the people in Twister, the people who are receiving the instructions, to see whether the people who are the most responsive to the instructions in Twister are also causing the most difference when they put hands on. That would be neat. Either do it on 2 different days or have the people receiving instructions come in at one time and then have the other people join them like half an hour or 40 minutes later. That would be fun.
I look forward to reading about that one. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. That's really interesting.
Thank you.